have been very clear to the Assad regime, but also to other players on the ground, that a red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized.
This morning, Syrian rebels tell us there was a series of what they claim were chemical weapons attacks. 10 villages at least to the east and north of Damascus, hit by what rebels say were surface-to-surface missiles fired by the regime and tipped with chemical weapons. The death toll, well over 1,000. Symptoms before death, witnesses tell us, were shortness of breath, constricted pupils, foaming at the mouth. We've seen videos posted online showing many women and children among the dead.
But this still photo captures a sliver of the horror. Syrian citizens trying to identify the dead bodies of children in the town of Arbin in Damascus. We've blurred the faces in this picture. More amateur video captures smoke rising in the aftermath of the bombings. Meanwhile, the stance of the major powers in regard to this conflict seems largely unchanged.
Suffice it to say, though, that the use of chemical weapons is something that the United States finds totally deplorable and completely unacceptable. And those who are responsible for the use of chemical weapons, if it's determined that that's what happened, will be held accountable.
You and I have both been, I think it's fair to say, skeptical of the efficacy of U.S. intervention. What is your reaction to the images coming out of Syria today?
This is more than a red line. Richard Engel is right. This is a moment where we need to show the regime that something will be done if he will continue. If he uses these weapons, he has to be held accountable. This guy has to not only leave, he has to relinquish power, and he has to actually give the UN access to all of these sites, because God knows who can access these sites further. I mean, if it's a failed state, you can have anybody. And we were, as you said, skeptical because there's within the Free Syrian Army this element that is very Islamist. What if in a case of failed state, there's these sites and who have access to these sites are these kind of Islamists? We need to intervene now before than ever.
As the Assad regime heightened its aggressions against the Muslims in the land of Sham, we witnessed this hadith coming to life before our very eyes. While the Muslims were being degraded and the Sharia of Allah was being forsaken for the laws of the Taghut, the Munafiqeen and those who sat on the branches of Nifaq claimed that there was no jihad, or that jihad with one's wealth was sufficient.
How did they end up where they are in control of so much territory? Was that a complete surprise to you?
Well, I think our head of the intelligence community, Jim Clapper, has acknowledged that I think they underestimated what had been taking place in Syria.
I mean, he didn't say that, just say that we underestimated ISIL. He said we overestimated the ability and the will of our allies, the Iraqi army, to fight.
That's true. That's absolutely true.
That may not be as surprising as it sounds. NBC's chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel says plenty of people saw it coming from miles away.
Luke, this is a surprising admission by the president. Not so surprising that he admitted that the intelligence agencies underestimated ISIS's strength in Syria and overestimated the ability of the Iraqi army to fight against ISIS. But shocking that the intelligence agencies didn't see this coming. It was well known. It was no secret that ISIS and other militant groups were growing in strength in Syria. Anyone who was looking at this region for the last 2 years would have seen that. We did numerous reports about foreign fighters streaming into Syria. We even interviewed some of the foreign fighters as they were going in and out, going in to join ISIS and ISIS-like groups inside Syria. So the fact that the U.S. intelligence agencies didn't see this threat coming and didn't see the problems with the Iraqi army, which were also well documented. Many people had said that the Iraqi army was divided, that it was corrupt, that some of the units were simply Shiite militias, Shiite death squads. That was also well reported upon. So the fact that the intelligence community missed this one is a major failure. Luke?
Iraq's future will be in the hands of its people. America's war in Iraq will be over.
They lied. By the grace of Allah, the Islamic State expanded into the land of Sham.
بالسيف جمع الطغام ونمحو عن الكون ليل الظلام فيبزغ في الكون فجر جديد فيبزغ في الكون فجر جديد صواريمنا في العدا قاطعات وأفعالنا في
The flames in Iraq, meanwhile, continued their crawl, growing stronger, leaving the Americans in bewilderment, pondering what strategy to adopt in fighting the Islamic State. The reply from the White House was deceitful, as Obama was forced to respond to the rapid rise of the Islamic State.
The State Department Deputy Spokeswoman Marie Harf. Marie, thanks very much for coming in. I guess what the president said on 60 Minutes, that the intelligence community basically got it wrong. The intelligence community, at least elements there, they're coming back and saying for at least a year they were warning that ISIS was on the move, getting stronger, gaining territory. They don't think they necessarily got it wrong.
Well, what the president said was, for a long time, we've known about the serious threat from ISIL. But I think everyone, us, the Iraqis, even ISIL itself probably, was surprised by how quickly, earlier this summer, they were really able to take territory in Iraq. They moved more quickly than anyone could have imagined. And, you know, assessing the will of a force to fight, the capability is one thing you can assess, but the will, that's a really tough thing to assess. Having worked there, I know these are challenging assessments to do.
كذبوا الآن جاء القتال الآن جاء القتال فالآن جاء القتال وإننا منصورون إن شاء الله سواء أخرجتم أم لم تخرجوا فإن انتصارنا باستمرارنا ولئن خرجتم لتعودن عما قريب ولئن عجزتم عن العودة فلنأتينكم من شتى البقاع.
You guys having fun? Yes, sir. That's good.
فنحن الأسود وباب الضياغ نفل الحديد نفل الحديد بعزم شديد الحق جاء مجد تليد ليشرق في الكون مجد تليد قراع الأسنات لحن الرجال وفي الحرب عز وريف الظلال فقم للخلود أخي تعال ودع عنك درب الكسول البليد ودع عنك درب الكسول البليد إذا النار شبت فنحن الضرام نحرق بالسيف.
Something that he said back in January when he told the New Yorker when assessing the ISIS threat, he said the analogy we use around here sometimes, and I think is accurate, is if a JV team puts on Lakers uniforms, that doesn't make them Kobe Bryant. Is it safe to say that ISIS, they're no longer the JVs?
Many of those groups in nations across the globe are not particularly sophisticated, are focused on local sectarian conflicts that don't pose a significant or immediate threat to U.S. interests or the U.S. homeland.
But you don't think ISIS is a JV
There are, of
squad,
course, let me finish. There are, of course, a couple of other organizations that do pose a more substantial threat.
لنا المرهفات رضاب البواسم لا نصيحة الحق حين التصادم وبات الضياغم.
Allah continued to humiliate the enemies of the Islamic State, especially in Iraq.
You said that the president had laid out a clear and comprehensive strategy for dealing with this. Is it not at all distressing to the administration that this clear and comprehensive strategy thus far has seen ISIL make gains rather than driving than retreat?
Well, in fact, I would disagree with that, Matt. There have been certainly gains made by the Iraqi security forces in Iraq. I can go through some of those for you if that would be useful. We've said from the beginning, and the president has said from the beginning, that this would be would not be overnight, that this would be a long-term effort. And certainly I outlined, as I just outlined, there are some strategic objectives that we're focused on. We've gone after refineries. We're going after strategic locations. And let me just tick through these, and then we can go to your next question. Some of our successes we've seen on the ground by the Iraqi security forces. One moment. Sorry. Well, I'll find these. Okay. Sorry, I wanted to highlight them because that does not at all mean that, Matt. There have been the Iraqi security forces have pushed back and regained territory, and I just wanted to list through those, but I'll find them before we end the briefing. Go ahead.
Okay.
عن نعيم بن همار أن رجلا سأل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أي الشهداء أفضل؟ قال: الذين إن يلقوا في الصف لا يلفتون وجوههم حتى يقتلوا، أولئك ينطلقون في الغرف العلى من الجنة ويضحك إليهم ربهم، وإذا ضحك ربك إلى عبد في الدنيا.
On this, Saudi Arabia called the events in Iraq a Sunni revolution, adding that the sectarian and the exclusionary policies in Iraq over the past 3 years are behind the recent unrest in the country. Do you agree with the Saudis on this?
Well, the way we see this is that the situation is complex, and there are some tribes and key local Sunni politicians have joined with the Iraqi government. Others are working with ISIL through violence to destabilize the government. Those working with ISIL are, of course, supporting terrorists who adhere to an extreme ideology which believes that Shia should be killed based on their sect alone. Obviously, our view is that there needs to be the way that Iraq is governed by the leaders needs to take into account the legitimate grievances of all of the people.
That means you don't agree with them that what's happening is a Sunni revolution?
I think I made my comments clear. Go ahead.
It begins as a very slow and calculated attack, and then develops into deadly house-to-house combat.
تقدم إلى الموت ثم اقتحم وفي موكب العاديات التحم. تقدم إلى الموت ثم اقتحم وفي موكب العاديات التحم وخذ لي الشهادة حوما.
But they forgot that Allah comes to the aid of the mu'mineen, and they neglected to take any lessons from Iraq. They thought that they had the Islamic State cornered. Little did they know, the fighting had just begun.
It was a broad statement about the fact that this isn't a U.S. fight against ISIL. This is a fight that every country should feel deeply about and should take on.
Well, I guess I'm just wondering, why did he feel compelled to say something like this if, in fact, everything is going along swimmingly, according to, I mean...
We would be the last people to say everything's going along swimmingly.
No, but if you're already happy with what the people and governments around the Middle East are doing to extract the cancer,
to be clear,
why would
nobody's happy today about anything related to this?
No, well, all right, happy is not the right word. If you're already satisfied or believe that everyone in governments and peoples across the Middle East are already doing everything they can to extract...
That's also not what I said. Those are...
No, I'm trying to find out what the
I know, but what I said to his
answer
was we don't have evidence that governments are financially supporting ISIS. Okay. But we need all the governments in the region to work together with us to fight ISIS in any way.
Okay, but...
Because clearly it's a threat that's grown, and clearly, I think
I understand this. I'm not trying to be confrontational. I'm just trying to figure out, if you need all the governments to work together, do you think that they're not all working together now?
Clearly there's more we can all do to fight ISIL.
All right, so there's no specific country or specific...
وقال الله عز وجل ومن يتوكل على الله فهو حسبه. أيها الإخوة نستبشر بهذا العدد ونستبشر بهذا العتاد، لكن لا يكون همنا هذا العدة والعتاد. همنا هو التوكل على الله سبحانه وتعالى ورضا الكريم المنان الذي يحب أن يرانا في هذا المكان، ونحن نقاتل أعداء الله سبحانه وتعالى ونتقرب بدمائنا وأرواحنا، وهي أغلى الأنفس وأغلى الأشياء التي لدينا في هذه الحياة نقربها رخيصة رضا في سبيل الله سبحانه وتعالى، وحرم الله هذه الوجوه عن النار، وجزاكم الله خيرا.
And no faith teaches people to massacre innocents. No just God would stand for what they did yesterday and what they do every single day. ISIL has no ideology of any value to human beings. Their ideology is bankrupt. From governments and peoples across the Middle East, there has to be a common effort to extract this cancer so that it does not spread. There has to be a clear rejection of these kind of nihilistic ideologies. One thing we can all agree on is that a group like ISIL has no place in the 21st century.
The inks of light would now proclaim a new momentous era for the Ummah and the entire world. The return of the Islamic Khilafah to rule with the light of Allah's Sharia on the earth.
فهذا قوام الدين كتاب يهدي وسيف ينصر وإن إخوانكم المجاهدين قد من الله تبارك وتعالى عليهم بنصر وفتح ومكن لهم بعد سنين طويلة من الجهاد والصبر ومجالدة أعداء الله ووفقهم ومكنهم لتحقيق غايتهم فسارعوا إلى إعلان الخلافة وتنصيب إمام وهذا واجب على المسلمين واجب قد ضيع لقرون وغاب عن واقع الأرض فجهله كثير من المسلمين والذين يأثمون أي يأثم المسلمون بتضييعه وتغييبه وعليهم أن يسعوا دائما لإقامته وها هم قد أقاموه ولله الحمد والمنة ولقد ابتليت بهذا الأمر العظيم لقد ابتليت بهذه الأمانة أمانة ثقيلة فوليت عليكم ولست بخيركم ولا أفضل منكم فإن رأيتموني على حق فأعينوني وإن رأيتموني على باطل فانصحوني وسددوني وأطيعوني ما أطعت الله فيكم.
In the case of all three attempts in the last year, the terrorist attempts, one of which was successful, those individuals have had ties to radical Islam. Do you feel that these individuals might have been incited to take the actions that they did because of radical Islam?
Because of?
Radical Islam.
There are a variety of reasons why I think people have taken
these actions. It's hard. One, I think you have to look at each individual case. I mean, we're in the process now of talking to Mr. Shahzad to try to understand what it is that drove him espouse a version of Islam that is not.
Are you uncomfortable attributing any of their actions to radical Islam? It sounds like.
No, I don't want to say anything negative about a religion that is. No,
I'm not talking about a religion. I'm talking about radical Islam. I'm not talking about the general religion.
Right, and I'm saying that a person like Anwar Alaki, for instance, who has a version of Islam that is not consistent with the teachings of it, and who espouses a radical version.
Could radical Islam have motivated these individuals to take the steps that they did?
I certainly think that it's possible that people who espouse a radical version of Islam have had an ability to have an impact on people like Mr. Shahzad.
Okay. وعد الله الذين آمنوا منكم وعملوا الصالحات ليستخلفنهم في الأرض كما استخلف الذين من قبلهم وليمكنن لهم دينهم الذي ارتضى لهم وليبدلنهم من بعد خوفهم أمنا يعبدونني لا يشركون بي شيئا ومن كفر بعد ذلك فأولئك هم الفاسقون. وإن أردتم موعود الله فجاهدوا في سبيل الله وحرضوا المؤمنين واصبروا على تلك المشقة ولو علمتم ما في الجهاد من الأجر والكرامة والرفعة والعزة في الدنيا والآخرة لما قعد أو تخلف منكم أحد عن الجهاد. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين وأذل الشرك والمشركين وانصر عبادك المجاهدين الموحدين في مشارق الأرض وفي مغاربها.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله.
أما نحن فما قاتلنا يوما من أجل الأرض وإنما نقاتل لإعادة الخلافة وإقامة شرع الله، نقاتل لنحكم الأرض كلها بما أنزل الله.